Thank you. So as Das said, that I've been involved with the AS6081 in the creation, so I have a little different perspective. Being on an independent distributor that's certified to this standard, as well as being on the committee, along with all of the government contractors, the government representatives on the committee, I got to learn a lot about how what the concerns are from them as we work through and develop the AS6081 together. It was great that they invited in independent distribution in order to help tackle some of the problems that come along with just being an independent distributor on its own. It's a different industry, as you've been hearing this morning already. So basically, the AS6081 standard is a counterfeit avoidance standard developed by government and industry. It's created specifically for independent distributors. There are other standards out there for franchise distribution. They started to go down the road of being a part of this, but it soon it was very clear that it was a different standard needed to be placed for them. It was completed in 2012, which is quite a few years ago, but not until late 2014 could it even be audited to. So certification wasn't possible till last year. So you're starting to see now quite a few people applying to be AS6081 certified, and there's just a few of us out there that are already certified. And there are very prescriptive requirements in the AS6081. You know, a lot of standards don't have prescriptive requirements. I'll get more into it later, like ISO9001, how that works. But the requirements here, I'll just go over in general, and then we'll get into more detail. But personnel, counterfeit mitigation training, contract review, supplier approval and maintenance, verification of product, which is a fancy way of saying counterfeit avoidance testing, control of counterfeit product after it's been detected, what do you do with it, and then reporting of counterfeit product. So I want to go in a little bit into the creation of the AS6081 so you understand how it began. About 10 years ago, there was very obvious that there were a lot of problems with counterfeits. They were starting to surface very rampantly, and especially the government and the government contractors wanted to get put something together, and it came together under SAE as the G19 Counterfeit Electronic Parts Committee, started to work on some standards and a solution. The committee consists of subject matter experts from all parts of the industry, government, contractors, and even independent distributors like ourselves. So NASA was part of it, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, other independent distributors like Smith & Associates, Tom Sharp's company, and all kinds of people who are in this industry that needed to have their voice put into it. So, and the first project was the AS5553. You heard a little bit from Embraer this morning that they are using it as a basis for counterfeit mitigation in their particular company, and then pushing that down to their subcontractors. So that was their first. It was, and it has a lot of procedures for testing, but mostly it is just a methodology of how to avoid counterfeits, which included buying from franchise first, for example. Then the next task was AS6081, which became evident and needed because that's where most of the counterfeits are coming from independent distribution. So a great place to start, trying to mitigate that in the industry was to work on the independent distributors that were bringing all this in. So the standard was put together specifically for independent distributors. Some unique things about the AS6081 is it must be invoked by the customer. If you get ISO 9001 certified, a customer doesn't tell you, use the ISO 9001 certified plan when you're doing my order. But in this case, it does have to be. There's expensive procedures in place that need to be done, and companies like ours, we do business with commercial and we do business with military and medical. It just depends on what level of testing they want. So in this case, it's an invocable. So if you're an OEM and you want to have products, buy products from an independent distributor, I recommend that you realize that this is an invocable standard, which you must ask for them to use it. The other thing that was unique is the Defense Logistics Agency adopted it right away within a week. I think they started using it in their QTSL program, which was a real compliment to the people who put together the SAE G19 committee, that we were on the right path. And it is the AS6081 is the first counterfeit avoidance standard that's auditable by a third party. There are other standards out there, but they're audited internally by by the companies that created them. So this does help many ways. You know, SAE and ISO, they develop the standards, but they don't go out there and do the actual auditing. You're never going to see a SAE representative in a company doing the actual audit, looking for compliance. The audits are performed by certification bodies like NQA is really big right now as a certification body for this standard. You'll see others like UL and TUV will jump in. And then those are accredited by groups like ANAB, UKAS, which is in the UK, SCC for Canada. The one thing I wanted to just note about the prescriptiveness. So ISO 9001, for example, what happens with that is companies will go out and decide what they think is important, what requirements they need for their industry, and then an auditor will come in and make sure they're doing what they said they were going to do. In this case, with AS6081, there's a lot of very prescriptive requirements that are put into the standard so that you have to follow them. It's not something you come up with by yourself and follow. So it's much more prescriptive. The audits, they confirm every year they're going to come back, confirm that the company's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and make sure that we're doing it for those customers who are invoking the procedure. So just some of the requirements that are involved here. Extensive supplier approval process. It's getting stronger in the newer version, but right now there's even some requirements in order to do audits and surveys and make sure that they're not reported companies, regularly reported companies for counterfeits. And then there's investigation of previously reported counterfeit parts. So for example, if a company gives AERI a requirement, our company, we have to first go out, before we even start really looking for it, we want to go out and make sure that those parts haven't been counterfeited and reported before without lot code, date code. So that's a requirement. Removing suppliers for repeatedly reported counterfeits. For example, you saw those last slides from Fred where companies continue to buy from the same company over and over again and just return the parts. That's ridiculous, and it's dangerous. So there's rules for that. Make sure that doesn't happen in that. Must purchase from authorized first. So for example, if we're getting quoted from an Avnet and then a bunch of other independent distributors, the one that we need to push and make sure that the customer knows we want them to buy is the authorized. And we're going to tell them the actual name. I'll get into that more later, but the names of the different companies we're quoting. Changes of supply require customer approval. So for example, if I was going to buy from Avnet and all of a sudden we go to buy from them, parts aren't available from them anymore, we can't just all of a sudden go to another company and substitute those parts. Our customer needs to know and approve that they're going to be buying basically a new purchase order from the company approving to buy these parts from a different source through us. And here's verification of purchase product requirements. Again, that verification for purchase products means detection of electronic components for counterfeit. So here's just a brief overview, and then I'm going to get into the details a little bit more. So documentation, it's in packaging inspection. General visual inspection, this is of the whole lot. Every single part you look through. And then there's a detailed inspection of a minimum of 122 pieces per lot. Obviously, if there's 50,000 components, it's going to go up to more than 122. There's a sampling plan involved in the AS6081 that would bring that number up. Remarking and resurfacing test for 3 pieces per lot. X-ray of 45 pieces per lot. A decapsulation to look at the inside of 3 pieces per lot. Lead finish evaluation using either XRF or EDX of 3 pieces. And then optional tests, which highly recommended on high reliability, high risk parts with electrical tests, thermal testing, burn-in, scanning electron microscope, scanning acoustic microscopy, and hermeticity to make sure that there's no leaking of water into the components. So here's just some examples. I'm going to give you some real general examples. There's hundreds of different compliance issues that you have to go through, and I'm just going to show you a few. So here you've got a part that we're just checking the barcode on against. So this is a label that looks great from Allegro. It's probably an exact copy. They just changed the part number on it. They whited it out and made a new copy. On our screen, when you pull it up with the barcode, it doesn't match the part number. So it's just changing the one thing on the label doesn't work anymore. Then you got here just a misspelling, seal Kate. It says on the packaging label there. And these manufacturers, they don't make mistakes like that. Simple mistakes of English. When you're, as we've talked about this morning, 82% of this is happening in China, and they don't use the English language every day, so these are not things that stand out to them. General visual inspection, so this again is of 100% of the lot. In this, when we're doing this, we're looking at trying to separate the lots, looking for differences. Maybe the parts have been stored a little different. Some of them might have been out of a bag. Some of them are in the moisture sealed bag. So you separate all your lots doing this. Make sure that there's nothing unusual, big changes on the parts. Again, detailed inspection. So this is where you get, there's about 45 different areas we check, but here's a couple of just common ones. So of course the measurements, you're going to check it against the data sheet. Then you've got the manufacturer's markings. They should be perfect. The manufacturers know how to do this and get it done right. There's a lot of mistakes that happen with the counterfeiters when they're trying to recreate the logos. On the far right top there, you've got a very clean, perfect pin 1 marking. When the counterfeiters, if they try to remark it or do any cleaning, those often get damaged and get dirt in them. And then the leads, obviously these two leads, pictures here, they've never been used. There's no excess solder on them. You can even see copper coming through the end of one of them. And then this is the surface of the components, of the black components, the standard ICs that aren't ceramic. So for example, here in the middle, you've got an ideal looking part. It's kind of gritty, maybe a little sandpaper looking. When they blacktop over that, it gets a little bit more shiny, bubbly. You can really see it. Experienced QC techs can really see this. It's not hard for them to. And then if they use sandblasting, or sometimes they use an acid etch to get rid of the part number instead of doing blacktopping, so it's harder to detect. Then we can see, you can even see the silicon balls inside the package that are exposed. And that's not always the case on the sandblasting. Sometimes they do it a little lighter and you can't see those. So then you've got sanding marks, directional sanding marks here after you take off blacktopping, very easy to see. And then here's a side view. They don't usually blacktop the sides because it's pretty hard to do that with the leads on the side and everything. So here's an example of the blacktopping on the top and the right kind of surface here, so you can really see them right up next to each other. And then resistance to solvents. So they have gotten very good with being able to keep solvents on through an acetone test. So they're using enamel and baking it on, and so it's very hard to. We're actually having to use some other solvents. Dynasolv 750 is one that's called out in the AS6081, and then there's a 1-methyl-2-pyrrolidone that also, these are heated up at a certain temperature for a certain time. Then you just wipe, use a cotton swab, and if the plastic wipes off or the paint wipes off, it makes it real easy to see that they're counterfeit. Decapsulation is still probably one of the best methods to be able to see what's inside the chip, and so that way you can really tell if the part's correct inside. There's been talk of clones today. Obviously they can clone the manufacturer and the part number also, but it is one of the most important steps to be able to see what's inside. Sometimes it's not this easy. In this case, that was the actual part number and the manufacturer. Sometimes the manufacturer, they're not on the parts, and you'll have mask codes. You're also going to be looking for double wire bonds. Once you get in there, you can see if a part's been reattached a second time because they've been harvested out and then put back in. And then after you've got you know that you've got the good stuff inside. And you only do that with 3 samples for the AS6081. Then you can go and x-ray a larger sample size, and you can see, in this case, it was very easy to see that the die frame was different, the wafer size is different, the routing of the wires is different. But it's a good way to see after you've opened them up and seen that it's the right die inside that you've actually got lots of good parts, not just one that you've decapped. Another requirement in the AS6081 is to use XRF or the ASD/ASX to find out what the elemental breakdown is on the parts, on the leads particularly. You can see the thickness of the metal as well as what it's made out of. And it's very accurate, and luckily a lot of the data sheets from the manufacturers show you what they're supposed to be made out of. And so they're very easy to compare and make sure. This helps again with if someone's cloning something, you're going to be able to see oftentimes that they're not using the exact same metal and the thickness on the leads. Here, for example, this one had a lot of PB in it, so if you're looking for a Rojas version, this definitely would be a counterfeit. So there's a required report that comes along with the AS6081, and this is just a few pages as an example, because they're 20 to 40 pages, depending on the part and depending on how many lots there are. So you might have 10 different lots, 10 different pictures for each one. So this is the next best thing at this point for a CFC. When the parts are out in the open market, what can you can't get the CFC anymore. So this creates some sort of new traceability and new pedigree in a way. Make sure that the parts, and then you can a company can keep this with them for passing it down the line, and or if there's ever any trouble, you can go back to this and see if that might have been the component that was causing the failure. Some other AS6081 requirements that don't really fit in the purchasing and the quality area. So 1-year warranty is something that became required with the AS6081. So if a distributor is doing all this testing, they should be pretty confident that they're going to be able to warrant the product for at least 1 year. And then there's liability and also E&O insurance. E&O insurance is errors and omissions insurance, and this is it's a common insurance, especially like in the real estate industry. That if a real estate broker doesn't see that there's a crack in the slab, well, this is the same thing. If an independent distributor doesn't see that the parts are counterfeit, somehow they have an escape, there's insurance related to that, and that would help the manufacturer with a recall, fixing their boards, any lawsuits that might happen from damage. And then internal audits are required. I think it's quarterly, so that helps the distributor make sure that they're continuing to be compliant through the year in between audits, and those will be checked on by the auditor when they come, make sure that there's corrective actions put into place if there's any problems. And here's a big one: supplier source transparency. There's a requirement in the AS6081 that requires the distributors to actually tell the source during the quote process, tell who their source is, which kind of seems backwards, because that's why we're in business, to find parts and get them to manufacturers. So for example, if AERI, our company, is quoting Avnet, then we would have to actually put that on our quote and tell them that we're getting from Avnet. So what's to stop them to go directly to Avnet after that? We can put in things in place, and hopefully we have a good enough relationship with the company that they wouldn't want to do that. But there's actually some guidance that I'm going to go into in a minute where we can put into some legal documentation to help protect us on that. So yeah, there's a lot of guidance in the appendices. One of them is an NDA for that particular purpose, but there's also supplier approval and selection guidance, appropriate contractual language. There's attorneys that are focused on this industry that actually put together language specifically for our independent distributors that we can just plop right into our terms and conditions. And then reporting guidelines and contacts and training resources. For example, IDEA has a great training program for basic counterfeit detection. So now revision A is coming. It's not quite done. There's still some things that are they're going to go through a balloting process soon, and there are some changes that are going to be great protect you more from getting counterfeits. One of the things is the application more clearly defines the inclusion of electrical and electrical mechanical parts. Supplier evaluation requirements became more prescriptive, so a lot of the requirements that were down in the guidance, they're moving up, which is good. Some of those, for example, are the check of address type of suppliers. So, nowadays it's pretty easy to go use Google Earth and you can come down and get on the street and see if it's a post office box, a home, or if it's actual business. So that's real helpful. Consideration of supplier certifications. Are they ISO 9000? Are they even ISO 9001 certified, or do they have others? AS9120, for example. And then check of counterfeit history on shared databases. So before we approve a supplier, put them on our suppliers list, they need to go through a process where we look on GuideUp and AERI, make sure that they haven't been reported. And the AS6081 distributors are now going to have to keep up on the latest threats, which is, we're talking about cloning today. So they're going to be required, the auditors are going to come in and say, hey, what are you doing to make sure you're keeping up on these threats? A symposium like this is something, technical papers, going out to train, actual physical training for the QC techs, those kind of things that's required in the new version. But the most significant change is all of the testing requirements have actually been removed from the document. And it's in a move because of the fact that the AS6171 is coming soon, and that but you're going to hear a lot more about that tomorrow. There's a whole section on that about what that is. But basically, the AS6171 details a method to evaluate a risk, then uses a calculated risk to choose the appropriate test methods for particular product groups. So AS6081 distributors then, they're going to be required to ask about this risk category. So as an OEM using the AS6081, you'll come up with a risk category that we'll be asking you for, and then we'll put it, is it a high risk? Then we're going to do electrical testing, burn-in, all that kind of stuff. Is it low risk? Then and it's going to default to the low risk if you don't have an answer, so it's very good for you to come up with an answer and go through the process. Revision A will also require distributors acting as a lab to be accredited to ISO 17025. So that's going to be great because it'll make sure that the QC techs that are using the equipment, they know how to use it and what they're looking for. So here's a list of all the standards. When these are done, AS6171, which is still not published, and the AS6081A, which is also not published. Once these are all put together, though, it's a great chain to protect the company, the customer, and your companies. So if you're an OEM and you're concerned about counterfeits, you utilize and put into place the AS5553. Then you use an AS6081A certified distributor that uses the test specs of that AS6171, either with a lab or internal. And then they are going to be forced to be compliant with the ISO 17025, or it's called accredited. It's not actually certification, it'll be accredited, but it's like a certification. And continue on with the evolution here. So the reporting section's gotten pulled up also from guidance. Now there's going to be requirements that they must be reported within 60 days of detection. The contractual language for responsibility of reporting used to be just between the customer and the distributor. Now the distributor is forced to make that happen, some sort of a agreement between who's going to report the counterfeits if it does happen, but it has to happen. And that will be something we'll be audited to make sure that's happening. The part number, lot and date code, the name of the supplier. Now that's not the distributor, that's the AS6081, but that's the supplier they bought it from. Digital images, X-ray images, evidence of counterfeit. Now that's a big deal because there's a lot of things being called counterfeit that aren't really counterfeit. So to put it in there so they know exactly why these were called counterfeit is very important. For example, just a couple weeks ago on GuideUp, I saw a report for parts being counterfeit because they were programmed. And that's just, obviously you could put that in that classification. And it might make sense, but it's not something you want to go back and contact all the customers you ever sold that part to and have them recall those parts, because it's not, if they're working and they were not programmed that particular lot that you end up getting, then it shouldn't be a problem. And the order of reporting is established, so who, to, and when. So for example, the first order of reporting is to report it within your own organization, the distributor's organization, then to the customer, and then start doing the outside reporting to GuideUp. There's an IPR center reporting requirement, AERI. And then, so also it's going to be added to the new revision that AS6081 distributors are going to have to check those reporting sites once a month to make sure that they're keeping up with all of the latest parts that are getting caught. So if we were to catch, while we're doing that process, we see some parts that we bought and sold before, the same lot code, then we might have to go out and tell all of our customers that we sent that lot code to them. Can we have those back? And we're going to do this new test to see if we can catch it in the same way that was caught by this other company. It also will really help, again, to keep us up on the latest threats. If we're looking at all the new counterfeits that are being put out there as reported, we're going to see all the new problems that are going on. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a better idea of what the 6081 is, what's happening to it, and how you might be able to use it in your organization.
How long does the whole thing take?
The whole thing, well, if you had no backlog, then it could just take maybe 2 days. You could get it done, all the processes. But in a normal, we quote 5 days just because we have to put them in order with the other orders that we have. So the question is are people coming to us specifically for 6081 because we're certified for the testing? And I would say the answer to that is yes, absolutely. It's coming quicker. It wasn't very much in the beginning, but you're starting to see more companies that are looking for 6081 distributors. And then the unfortunate thing is that when they hear about the pricing, which is $750 plus per lot, sometimes they back down and they start to use some lower, maybe they get less decaps, less x-ray. So they change it up a little bit to get a little better price. Right now we're just doing the test services with the parts, selling the parts. We've considered opening a lab, using the lab for both purposes. But at this time we're keeping busy, so we'd have to add some staff in order to do that. I would say the most stern were the prime contractors, the ones that really held it in line. The independent distributors got to have a say, but I would say that it was definitely run by the prime contractors, and it was good. There's a lot of things in there, as I mentioned, that are very difficult requirements for us, and I think they're good requirements, but they make it tough on the distributor.
Thank you.
Thank you.